Earthquakes are a natural hazard that people need to know and be prepared for. Today, we'll be discussing an earthquake that struck Virginia August 23, 2011 at 1:54 p.m. On the magnitude scale, this earthquake was a 5.8. The depth of this was a total of 6 kilometers, or 3.7 miles. A decent amount of earthquakes have occurred in this area, known as the Central Virginia Seismic Zone. We'll discuss why a bit later. This particular earthquake received a lot of mockery from the West Coast. Their earthquakes are bigger and can be felt over larger distances. Well, this isn't necessarily true. Earthquakes on the East Coast are felt over much larger distances. As you can see from this map of similar sized earthquakes on opposite coasts, the East Coast is felt over a great distance compared to the West Coast. Earthquakes on the East Coast can be felt nearly 10 times farther than earthquakes on the West Coast, which is strange because this area is known as a passive margin. Now, let's talk about why this earthquake and many before it happened. Well, ironically, no one is 100% sure. There are some good scientific theories as to why they occur. One possible reasoning is the Wilson cycle. This happens when the continent is being pulled apart along a newly formed fault, causing earthquakes in rift valleys. These valleys become filled with basalt and eventually breaks off along a passive margin and forms a new subduction zone. Another logical explanation is the mile-thick ice that was present nearly 18,000 years ago. However, the land is still moving as a result. Post-glacial rebounding is happening because thick, heavy ice had a downward effect on the crust and affected the mantle. Now the reverse is happening. As you can see from this diagram, this may have something to do with the plate movement and activity. Or could these earthquakes be aftershocks of large prehistoric earthquakes? It remains a mystery and leads to great possibilities for new research.
The physical aftermath of the 2011 Central Virginia earthquake, while it was not to the degree of larger earthquakes felt along the more active fault lines such as the San Andreas, the earthquake did damage many older buildings and chimneys, seen in the image of the Towers of Ilium. This 8-story concrete building built in the 1920s shook violently and caused the falling of several of the towers, as well as the destruction of several older homes from the chimneys falling, and then the collateral damage from those chimneys falling, as seen in the second image. Along with the smaller and older buildings that were damaged, damage was also dealt to some well-known national monuments, such as cracking in the Washington Monument, which is seen in the image above of it during the process of being repaired, as well as the Washington National Cathedral, which the left capstone and several others have broken off. Along with these, the old Soldiers' Home and Ecuadorian Embassy both suffered foundational damage. Also was the displacement of some 500 people from the Prince George's County upon the condemning of 2 high-rise buildings. On the top of these physical effects, D.C. as a whole shut down for the most part, with the evacuation of the White House and Capitol building, the federal courts shutting down, and several Washington offices were also evacuated. The chaos was brought to the point that the cell phone networks were so clogged that the Federal Emergency Management Agency had to send out a message to the public to move to using text or email or alternative sources of contact. While the history of earthquakes are sparse in comparison to areas near known fault lines, this area and the East Coast have had several earthquakes near this magnitude over the past couple of centuries. The most recent one in this area of Virginia to look back on in recorded history was in 1897, which was felt from as far south as Georgia to as far west as Indiana. Other earthquakes have also occurred along this passive continental margin, such as a larger 7.2 magnitude earthquake that struck near Charleston, South Carolina in 1886, which effect took 5 years for the city to recover from and can still be seen today from damages done to the Charleston's Randolph Hall, as seen in the east wing of the picture above. Another more recent earthquake was in 1933, where a 7.3 magnitude earthquake hit in Baffin Bay, and another in 1929, a 7.2 magnitude earthquake occurred off the Grand Banks of Newfoundland. As for the assessments of risks for future earthquakes, there is at the moment no true way to predict the likely time or place of an earthquake, other than viewing previous shake maps from previous earthquakes and just seeing where the epicenters were from these events and finding where the affected areas are, and with this data, finding the areas where there is a danger zone or where there is not. Also, as seen in the image above, there are 3 major zones, including eastern Tennessee, Giles County, and central Virginia. Based upon previous events, one could assume that a large earthquake occurs once every half century or so, give or take a decade or two, but still this is an assumption and shouldn't be used as fact. While the earthquakes in this area are sparse to say the least, that doesn't mean that they should be ignored. To assist in reducing the impact of future earthquakes, several things should be done to accomplish this objective. For one, as seen in the image above, of new building methods and designs to reduce the risk of damage from an earthquake. Another method to reduce the impact of future earthquakes would be to have a well-known plan on what to do in case of an earthquake, as it is seen in some western cities that actually are along faults, and have this plan spread out to the entire population to prevent the chaos and confusion as seen on this occasion. Such a drill could be as simple as the one seen in the image above on what to do in case of an earthquake. Other than these methods, another option would be to tear down or reinforce older buildings, or just simply keeping them at a reasonable distance from other populated areas or buildings, so in the case that these do fall, there isn't a domino effect. So while this wasn't a large earthquake that induced thousands of human casualties and millions upon millions of property damage, it is, however, one of the most geologically important events in recent history to occur on the East Coast, and as such will likely be studied further to research more about earthquakes of this nature and hopefully someday be an example for us to build upon and improve ourselves. And also with this, in case of the 2011 earthquake, we will rebuild!